All right, looks like we're at about time. So, hey everybody, thanks for coming out. My name is Kevin. I write for a blog called Mazer Patrol, and I might not have written the book on obscure giant monster movies, but now I have written a book on obscure giant monster movies. So, anyone who was at the last panel and wasn't able to get one, I brought down a boatload of copies. So, we should be good on that front. So today we're gonna talk about giant robot movies, and that's a matter that can sometimes get into some semantics, but it's something that's pretty popular in Japan. So starting off with this artwork to promote Pacific Rim Uprising, and who knows what the other figure in this
that
image
is Mazinger Z, the legend right there.
Yes.
It does
yes, it
actually
is.
say it right there.
Well,
That's the Infinity.
if I wanted to get really snarky, it'd be like, no, let's get a Robo. He's right up there. So, yeah. So this was another movie that just came out to promote the is it the 50th anniversary of DAIKAIJU works already. So movie in Japan, Mazinger Z. So Mazinger Z is one of the big famous robots that you see a lot in Japanese pop culture. We're not going to talk about him too much in this particular panel, but so you might be wondering, like, hey, this is a convention all about kaiju stuff, and there was a heated, vitriolic debate on Facebook a couple weeks ago where people were like, kaiju can't be robots, kaiju have to be something that is organic and yada yada yada. So I started posting examples that were probably ignored by everyone, but so we've got some examples here. So this is Toei, Toho, and Tsuburaya, who are pretty much like the big studios when it comes to kaiju material. And each one of these examples, like this is a, cyborg kaiju mecha Godzilla and robot kaiju collection, and they're using the word kaiju there, so I think it's fair to just lump it in. A giant robot doesn't have to be a kaiju, but there's some overlap, so I thought, hey, why not just have a whole panel for giant robot stuff? Now, if you want to get into debates, we could also say that, like, hey, sometimes we call things robots that aren't technically robots. Examples include anything that has a human pilot is technically not a robot, but they call them... Yeah, they call them robots in the movies, so I'm just going to say, hey, let's talk about these things as though they were robots, even if they're technically vehicles or mobile suits or whatever other terminology sometimes gets thrown around in there. Yeah, the Transformers, at least in the Marvel comics, are also technically not robots because they are naturally occurring somehow. I don't really understand that one.
Only first issue. They forgot it after.
Well, yes, but that's the wonderful thing about Marvel, is everything counts.
They're most definitely robots, though.
Well, they say that they're robots in disguise, so I'll count them.
The naturally occurring pulleys and gears.
Yes. So, I'll probably just say robots when I mean mecha, and that'll be the gist of it, but now is a great time to be a mecha fan, to go out to the movie theater and be able to see things. These are just a few examples within the past year of, fairly high-profile giant robot, see, I just did it, movies that have come out. And when we talk about this subject, anime is going to be a huge subject here, and I figured we're all sort of tokusatsu fans here. Let's sort of push the anime off to the side, because anime giant robots is a huge topic that we could go on for hours and hours and hours, and there's dedicated conventions just for that. At the same time, because we're all into Japanese-ish science fiction, I thought, there's all these Western examples, going back to War of the Worlds that we could be talking about, but we can, also bracket those off and say, let's talk about the Japanese, or frankly Japanese-inspired things that are out there. And then the other thing is, you all already know these examples. I don't have to tell you guys about these, right? We good?
Yeah.
Anyone not know these? All right, anyone that was on the wrong convention. So let's go back to the start of giant robots on the screen, and as far as I know, this was really kicked off with the Mysterians in 1957, which is the classic Toho space invasion movie where a bunch of aliens come to Earth and
Women.
yeah, they want, I think they want 3 women in 2 square miles of territory, and the entire Earth immediately mobilizes against them. It's very optimistic. But yeah, so we have this this robot that shows up in it, and this robot is named Mogira. An interesting thing is Mogira is a pun on the Japanese word for mole, and Mogira was not originally intended to be a robot. It was originally conceived of as a more organic creature. So why would Toho want to get in on robots? And if you look, the year before that, there's this manga that started called TETSUJIN 28go, or Iron Man 28, by an artist named Mitsuteru Yokoyama. And this is a big, huge staple of Japanese culture, to the point where they have built a life-size monument in Kobe of this robot. You know, the story is about this little boy whose dad gives him this remote control that can make this Iron Man wander around and do his bidding. It's most famous in the States because it was adapted into an anime in 1963 that was brought over as Gigantor. But that wasn't actually the first time that this character was on television. Going after the George Reeves Superman series, there was a live-action series 3 years earlier, and you can see the giant robot is not actually that giant compared to the people that he's going up against there. But it was still a strong start in sort of getting us down the road towards the tokusatsu on television that we eventually got. And in fact, this very same year, we got another show called Marine Kong. And Marine Kong is about a robot that looks like a dragon for reasons that a bunch of gangsters are using to terrorize Japan. But eventually control of that robot is given to a little boy, because that's what happens in Tetsujin, I guess. So Tetsujin was eventually done as a proper live-action movie in 2005, all with CGI in it. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the CGI that they use in it. It sort of lacks the weight, and the same special effects team that did this later went on to stuff like Ultraman Saga, which looks a lot better. But this movie is one of those things that's done by committee, and you can tell that it's done by committee, and there's things that are pulled in multiple directions. So you have your little boy is still dressed like it's the 1960s, even though it's supposed to take place in modern day. So you have this child inexplicably running around in a tweed jacket and tie. But this isn't the only movie with Tetsujin in live action, because Mamoru Oshii decided to do his own take, 28½, and the 8½, comes from a movie by Fellini called 8½, because Mamoru Oshii is a pretty weird dude. So this is a mockumentary about the making of a play that's a real play adaptation of Tetsujin, except it's got, you know, illusions and ghosts and things in it, so it's a little out there. But because they do have this robot that they constructed for the play, that's a fun thing to see if you don't get to actually see it on Broadway, or whatever the Japanese equivalent of Broadway itself would be. So Oshii is, of course, known for well, he directed the first Ghost in the Shell, which is about robot cops. So he how'd he get that gig? Well, he also created another anime that was about robot cops. So Patlabor is a series that he came up with in the 1980s, and basically the premise of Patlabor is that it takes place 10 years in the future. So in the far off year of 1998, you have these cops that giant robots have become commonplace. People are using them for exploring the ocean. People are using them for construction purposes. People are using them for the military. And every once in a while, one will fritz out and go on a rampage, or somebody will decide they're going to rob a bank using a giant robot. So of course the cops also have to have giant robots because that's only logical. It's a really weird series because when you think of like, okay, giant robot cops, you don't expect like, all right, this is going to be the corporate retreat episode, or this is going to be the episode about them getting stuck in traffic. There's, it's just tonally all over the place. And because Oshii was a fan of giant monster stuff, he did a couple of episodes that are just pastiches of the kaiju genre. There's, you know, an episode that's just a giant Ultraman parody. There's one that's a Toho science fiction parody. He always wanted to do this series in live action, and eventually in 2014, so right on the heels of Pacific Rim demonstrating that you can do live action giant robots, he gets a chance to. And he does this series that's 12 episodes and 2 movies, basically. And one of the big two-parters is actually the poster on the far side of me over there with the giant kappa. This may or may not be a lie, because there's a creature that shows up in the ocean, and the cops are tasked with taking care of it. And they speculate that it's a kappa, and they even call it Gappa, like the Shochiku monster, except they always bleep it out, so you can't be completely sure. Less like they refer to Godzilla and Dora. Yeah, so that has a sequence with a giant kappa monster attacking the city that was done by Kiyotaka Taguchi, who did Gihara the Long and Dark-Haired Monster and directed for Ultraman X also. Taguchi also directed an episode where it's a sequel to one of the animated episodes where they are going looking for a sewer alligator, because that's what's in the anime episode. In the live action episode, they find some eggs, they figure, oh, these are sewer alligator eggs. No, they're velociraptor eggs that are just in the sewer. So one of them tracks them back into the hangar, and their robot has to fight the dinosaur. So it's pretty great stuff. Unfortunately, this series has not been made available in the States so far, only the anime has, but fingers crossed. So speaking of stuff that's not available in the States and Kiyotaka Taguchi, his sort of first pet project was this movie called G. G is about 2 veterans from some unspecified Asian war who, one of them says, I'm going to make a formula, I'm going to inject it into soldiers, and they're going to become invincible. And the other says, I'm going to make these giant robot suits for our soldiers, so they're going to be invincible. And sure enough, the guy that injects himself turns into this giant rampaging monster, and the other guy has to take this robot to take him down. And it is a delightful, delightful movie. It's full of goofy things like, you know, the monster will pick up train cars and spin them around like nunchucks. They'll, you know, throw oil tankers at each other. The robot can launch his fist like it's, you know, the Shogun Warriors toys that have the spring-loaded firing fist. This robot has this, but it has the exact same physics of that. So, you know, the fist launches and like goes like 2 feet and then drops to the ground. So it's only available in Japanese, nobody's translated it, but it's still pretty fun to watch, and it has all of these hallmarks, you know, the long takes that Taguchi likes to do, and things like Ultraman X later. Of course, it's going to be really difficult to Google, because the name is just G. Thank goodness there's no other robot series that do that. Well, except D.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, this is a grim and gritty series of direct-to-video things by Junya Okabe, who went on to become vice president of Tsuburaya. And basically, this is about a guy that's a criminal that's locked up, but he's also the pilot of this robot. And the government will let him out only when a monster's on a rampage, so he'll go out and cause more collateral damage and extend his sentence. And it's pretty harrowing, so I wouldn't say like let the little kids watch this one, but it has some ambitious effects for, you know, it's definitely like filmed on video, and I'm surprised that it did get a DVD release in the US. So this type of robot is, you know, it's not like a huge one. It's more in line with what we'd think of as a suit, really, where it's essentially, you know, the pilot's in the middle. Like think of the what Ripley uses at the end of Aliens. And that's a motif that you see in a lot of sort of mecha fiction in Japan. Going back probably actually to something from not Japan, which is Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers was a huge hit, and it got a couple of different anime releases. So eventually the American movies also included the mecha suits that were in the original novel, but that style really influenced what became known as the real robots in Japan, where it's not like the robot is a superhero as much as it's just an instrument of warfare. So you think of the robot in the same way that you think about a tank or a fighter jet or something like that. They're usually mass produced, and you have a whole bunch of them sort of battling another group of people who also have robots, as opposed to the monster showing up one per week for some reason, and then the hero robot goes and slays them. So we've had a couple of examples of that in live action. One of them that Tsuburaya actually made was based on a tabletop board game called SF3D NUTROCKER or MASCHINEN KRIEGER. I'm not sure which is the better name there. Yeah. This was only released on VHS, but you can find it on YouTube, and it's sort of fun to watch just for the sort of scenes of the battlefront with these sort of puppet robots walking around. It's a different design than you normally see in other Tsuburaya stuff like Ultraman, right? Another real robot that some of us might be familiar with, because this actually started off as a pitch for a Godzilla movie. Gunhead was the idea for the Godzilla movie was that there's this supercomputer that is taking over the world, and Godzilla has to fight his way through this island that is full of enemy robots and get his way to the core and disable the computer. And basically Toho was like, okay, but no. And they swapped it out with a giant robot instead. Gunhead is not a good movie, but it has a surprisingly hardcore fan base. The effects are pretty fun to watch. So it's Koichi Kawakita sort of at his peak. This is the same time he was doing like Godzilla vs. Biollante and stuff. So I can understand why it has a bit of a cult following, and if you can watch the special effects and maybe don't listen to the acting as much, then it can be a lot more fun. But because it has such a cult following, there's a weird sort of like extended Gunhead universe that's been made over the years. Kawakita went back with model kits and actually filmed his own sequel, or prequel, I guess this is, that was only available on a DVD that was sold with one of the model kits. There's also a manga adaptation by Kiya Asamiya. There's a sequel novel series, like multiple novels that take place far, far, far in the future. And then there was also the video game. This video game was released in the US as Blazing Lasers. It's actually Kanye West's favorite video game, so that's a nugget of trivia for you there. So the name Gunhead is definitely meant to evoke something else, and that is the Gundam. So Gundam is the most famous, most iconic, most popular robot franchise to ever come out of Japan. It's one of the most popular ever. And basically it's about there's a whole lot of different series. Generally it's about a war in space between different factions that have giant robots, and they battle against each other. To give you an idea about how popular it is, this is a statue of a a statue of a Gundam that's full scale, so you can see little people walking around in front of it. And it is in front of a Gundam museum, and there's more than one of these statues. So it is a big deal. Pretty much every person from Japan that I've talked to is at least aware of this, so it's sort of like, hey, have you heard of Spider-Man to an American? Something like that, where people know about it. Weirdly though, they've stuck with video games and animation and haven't really ever gotten into live action stuff with Gundam. But we're Americans, so we don't know any better. So
well, they just announced a live action
action movie with a
That's the
legendary.
fake one. This is the real deal.
Yeah. Spoilers. Yeah, so there have been a couple of attempts to do Gundam in live action. The first one is actually for a video game that is fairly reviled. Then G-SAVIOUR is also reviled, but people are better able to ignore it. This one is actually part of the original Gundam continuity still, but it takes place like a couple centuries after everything else, so it doesn't really matter or seem relevant to any of the things that go on in the proper Gundam story. This is another one where it's entirely CGI when they could have used some more practical effects. It was done, pretty much on like a Sci-Fi Channel television budget, and it's not fantastic, but just the novelty of live-action Gundam. Also, I'm a bit of I fight Gundam fan sometimes. My favorite Gundam series is the one where it's a giant kung fu tournament. So
Yeah.
That's a fan favorite, though.
for some fans. Others are like, how can you have a Gundam that's a windmill? Why is there a Gundam that's a horse that's piloted by a horse?
Master Gundam's a horse, though.
Why were some of the Gundams named things so racist they had to change them for America?
Yeah,
Just change the names, really.
Yeah. But yeah, this is out there, so you can find it for fairly cheap if you feel so inclined, if you're a completionist. Now, Gundam had some influences on Pacific Rim to the point where they'd actually call out stuff from Gundam in Pacific Rim. So, if you look here at this, like, over Pentecost shoulder, you can see XR78 written on the hanger behind him. That's the serial number of the original Gundam. And then Striker Eureka's serial number is GN006, which is also one of the Gundams from Gundam 00. So these are subtle things, it's something that you're probably not going to notice. So, of course, the sequel, Pacific Rim Uprising, is not so subtle with things like this. So they just throw an actual Gundam into the movie for no reason, just hanging out in Tokyo. This is not one of the monuments. It's not one of the statues. A lot of people thought that was what it was, but it doesn't look like any of the ones that actually exist. And also, it's sitting in front of an Anaheim electronics store. So this is a fictitious company that exists in the Gundam universe. So it seems like Legendary is really like pumping Gundam for some reason. Why would they be promoting this other property that they have nothing to do with? Well, as you just mentioned, last week Legendary announced that they're doing a live-action Gundam movie. So that's 3 examples right there of Gundam in the U.S. in live action.
G-SAVIOUR's Canadian, though.
Yeah, I suppose so. In North America, well,
The West.
yeah, in the English-speaking West. So that's 3 examples. So that's, I think, all of them. Oh wait, yeah. So the movie Ready Player One, I'm assuming most of us at least heard about the Mechagodzilla cameo in the movie. If they have not seen the movie, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ready Player One is a huge pop culture mashup of all sorts of different properties. In the movie, they're mostly things that Warner Brother owns, but in this case, they went to 2 different Japanese studios and were able to negotiate these characters coming together. And this is the greatest Gundam and Godzilla mashup since, well, that video game where they play soccer against each other. But
X-Omega, though.
oh yeah, there was a Super Robot Wars game, wasn't there?
Yes, it had both Blade Godzilla and Kiryu in it.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I enjoy the Ready Player One movie, but I do sort of wish that they had gone with what they had originally had in the novel, because in the novel, the main character actually pilots the giant robot from the Spider-Man series.
Oh.
And then when that doesn't work, he pulls out a beta capsule and transforms into Ultraman. So it's pretty amazing, but licensing things with Marvel and we all know about the issues with Tsuburaya and Chayo, so that's about the trouble that we have there. Anyway, moving along, we've got some other examples. So Ready Player One is a giant pop culture mashup, and Japan is prone to doing those as well. So 20th Century Boys is a trilogy from Toho, and it's actually the most expensive movie project that they've ever made. It's based on a manga by Naoki Urasawa. And the premise of 20th Century Boys is you had a whole bunch of kids that would hang out and play together back in the 1960s. And they were just playing their games like kids do, and they're like, haha, what if at the end of the century a giant robot showed up and started spraying poison everywhere, and then the airport blows up, and they have a good time, and then they forget about it. Cut to the future, they're all sort of middle-aged, and like the Stephen King novel It, like they're all reminded of their youth as the things that they were prophesizing as kids start actually happening. And it turns out that one of their group of friends must be responsible, and it becomes sort of a thriller mystery as they're tracking down the party responsible as he takes over the government and starts literally destroying the world. So this movie has a couple of fun robot designs in it, and they're very sort of atypical. So this one is a big sphere on a couple of legs, and then there's one on the poster over there that's based on the Tower of the Sun that was at the Osaka 1970 Expo. So that's an example of the nostalgia pop culture throwbacks that are in this. So other examples, you have, the guy when he takes over the government, eventually he has all of his enforcers walking around in science patrol outfits from Ultraman. And there's actually even a brief Godzilla sequence in it where somebody reminisces about going to see Son of Godzilla in the theater. All right, so another movie about the past coming back to bite you, so to speak, is Orochi Strikes Again, which was either the last project from Daikon Film or the first project from Gainax, depending on who you ask and when. So this is the team of people that would eventually go on to make projects like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Wings of Oniamis.
It's Hanamis.
Hanamis?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you please stop interrupting? That's super
Seriously.
rude. And please, thank you.
It's cool. No worries. Yeah, and one of the best giant robot things ever is Gunbuster. Anyway, they started off doing some live action fan films basically, and the culmination of these projects, actually, this is the first effects directorial gig of Shinji Higuchi, who did the Gamera trilogy, for example, and co-directed Shin Godzilla, which I guess is the other thing to bring up with his name now. So this movie is about the eight-headed dragon from Japanese mythology, and he's brought back to life basically by aliens. Except it was always a robot all along when it came back in ancient times. These aliens have been reawakened, and they're sort of not very good at being alien invaders. So they're like, okay, well, we can restart our conquest of Earth, and they basically launch the Orochi, and there's a big battle with the military, so it's a lot of fun. Another sort of quirky, not quite that well known robot thing is Roborock. So this is I guess a little bit of a spoiler, even though it's on the poster. This is about a guy that is sort of a sleazebag guy that does odd jobs that are questionably legal. And one day he gets called by a scientist, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to control a giant robot for me." And it's not really clear over the course of the movie whether or not there is actually a giant robot or this is just a crazy guy. But sure enough, at the end of the day, when they're being chased down by the mob and they're backed into a corner, the guy is able to awaken the robot and then fly into space and fight the alien invasion that is also apparently real. Yatterman. This is based on a classic Tatsunoko show. So Tatsunoko, they created Speed Racer and Gatchaman, or Battle of the Planets as it was known in the States, and a handful of other things. This movie was directed by Takashi Miike, so it's a little bit like the original anime is a little bit on the risque side, but he is of course prone to doing that as well. So it's a weird look for like, okay, here's this like nostalgic kids property that is also being taken by this maverick director, and you get something a little bit strange out of it. And he's done similar things a couple of times. You might notice that the robots in this look sort of like giant toys. So that brings us to things that really look like toys.
It's so cute.
Yeah. So if you wanna look at what the special effects director Koichi Kawakita of the Heisei Godzilla series was doing towards the mid 2000s, this is one of the things where there's this line of dolls, the Jenny dolls in Japan, and basically they did a TV series where they are a team that defends against evil invading teddy bears. It's pretty short, and it's fun. It's not for everybody though. You have to deal with the main characters just being essentially Barbie dolls. Kawakita also did the SAZER series, which was sort of Toho's follow-up to, as they were phasing out Godzilla, they were starting up this superhero franchise that was sort of aping, what Toei was doing. So they'd have, teams of transforming superheroes, and of course these transforming superheroes all had their own mecha. And they had a big crossover movie where they had, the three teams that they did all came together in 2005, and this is the big winter release. So it was right after Final Wars had happened, and they're like, well, we don't have a big release for the winter. We haven't had a time without a Godzilla movie in the winter for so long. What do we do? And this was it. And it was actually directed by Kazuki Omori, who did a couple of Godzilla movies before. So this franchise is also fun for Godzilla fans because there's all sorts of Easter eggs. You'll have maser cannons rolling around, and the dock that one of the robots is the same one from the Kiryu movies. Then there's things that are not just recycling, but like actual continuity. So Chujo from Mothra and Tokyo SOS shows up in one of the episodes. And then in this movie, the Gotengo from Godzilla Final War shows up, and it helps out the main characters in their time of crisis. So the SAZER series is definitely playing on Super Sentai. Super Sentai is a huge property in Japan that's been going since the 70s. Every year there's a new team with their own giant robot. If we try to break down, there's over 100 Super Sentai movies and many series to go through. It's a pop cultural thing, and it's sort of emulated all around the world. We've got parodies. So Sexy Rangers. This was directed by Shinji Nishikawa, like the guy that does all of the Godzilla illustrations, the guy that designed the Heisei creatures. Then we've got examples in France. There's a series called France 5. There's a American parody called Gigabots, and then there's less good American attempts at Super Sentai. Yeah, so Power Rangers, at least in the TV version, is Super Sentai episodes that have been sort of cut apart and reconstructed, and reconstruction compilation things are something that happens a fair bit with importation to the West. So just as some compilation movie examples, we have Voyage into Space. So that was the TV series Giant Robo, which was by the same artist that created TETSUJIN that we talked about earlier. Giant Robot was brought over to the US as Johnny Sacco and his Flying Robot. And we got this whole series, but we still got a compilation movie of the series, which always struck me as a little bit strange, but I guess you can have the best of both worlds that way. Another example is Iron Man 17, which was released here as Brain 17 in a compilation movie. This was created by Shotaro Ishinomori, who also created Kamen Rider and Super Sentai and Cyborg 009, and has the world record for the most pages of comic book ever drawn by one individual. So this is one of those ones that's only available on VHS, but if you can track it down, it's a fun little watch. The whole series of Starfleet was actually brought over to the States. It recently got a DVD release through Discotech Media. Who was at the Howl from Beyond the Fog panel? Awesome. So he was talking about the influences on Howl from Beyond the Fog is a kaiju movie that's all done with puppets. And one of the examples that he listed as a influence was actually this show. So in this series, all of the cast are puppets. Thunderbirds was huge in Japan, so they wanted to do something similar. So they call up this guy named Go Nagai, who created Mazinger and Getter Robo and a handful of other big, important Japanese things. For anyone that's upset, yes, he co-created Getter Robo. Yeah, so the puppets are the human cast, and then the giant robot that they form is all done in Suitmation. This series was then imported to the UK, where it ran on television for a while, and it became very, very popular over there. And the opening theme song got a cover by Eddie Van Halen and Brian May of Queen. So you can actually find, albums to this day if you look around of just the opening and see the robot from this. And even when Go Nagai saw it, he was like, I'm confused, what's going on here? Another example that we have of going international is JUMBORG Ace and Giant. So JUMBORG Ace is a Tsuburaya series. It's basically like Ultraman if instead of merging with a human, the space alien comes down to Earth, finds the human, and is like, hey, have this giant robot that turns into a plane later. And it took off. It got licensed in a couple of different Asian countries, including Thailand. And basically, the company that there's a studio in Thailand, Chayo, that licensed the character, and they brought a bunch of Japanese technicians down to work on a movie there where the giant hero would meet up with a Thai god, and they would thwart some alien invaders. And this was later also done for one of the Ultraman movies, and created a lot of headaches down the road for Tsuburaya, which is a whole other conversation that we could potentially get into sometime later. Another sort of weird case is the series Super Robot Mach Baron. Has anyone seen Super Robot Red Baron? It was released on DVD here. Cool. So Mach Baron was a sequel to Red Baron that was brought over to, I think it was Taiwan first, and re-edited with Taiwanese actors, and then from there it got redistributed to several other territories. And now, if you want to see any version of Mach Baron with English subtitles, what you can do is you can go on Amazon Prime and find it dubbed into German with English subtitles. That's Japan, Taiwan, Germany, maybe something in between there. But we have good news for Red Baron fans, because just last year, Junya Okabe, the same guy that did Dark Soldier D, just came out with a new movie called Brave Storm, which sort of combines a couple of series from the same studio. The one that's the most giant robot-y is Red Baron here, so we can sort of see the difference in designs there. There's also Silver Mask was one that's eventually became a giant hero in this TV show and was not actually giant in this movie. And then if you're a fan of Iron King, watch till the end of the credits. I'll say that much. Another one of my favorites is Tekoki Mikazuki. This is a 2000 miniseries, so they only had one episode per month, but they were like double-length episodes, which is strange, unusual for live-action effect shows in Japan. This is all done by Keita Amemiya, who went on to create Garo, and before this he had created Zerum and Moon Over Tau and Hakaider, the movie. And this is just absolutely delightful. And we can, even if we want to hold it only to movies, the first episode is feature length, and everyone, even if you have only seen the first episode, you know about the watermelon monster. It's one of my favorite kaiju designs ever. So it's about as vicious as you could ever imagine a watermelon looking. So we've got a couple of other things that were on TV. Another mini-series was GUNBOT. This was one of the final projects that Koichi Kawakita ever worked on. This was while he was working as a lecturer at Osaka University of Arts. So his students worked together with him on this 4-episode series that has you can tell that it's a little done on the cheap side, but it's still fun to watch. And then you can also be like, wow, this is what the guy that created those Heisei Godzilla movies eventually went on to. There's a series called Robo-san that I couldn't get through it. It was a lot of drama and not as much robot stuff as was actually advertised, but I think that sort of is what happens when you're trying to do CGI. And the CGI does look pretty good for a TV budget, especially in Japan. But we've illustrated now that you can do CGI robots on a TV budget, and the Disney Channel apparently went ahead and picked that up. I was surprised by how much I liked this show. It's sort of a cheap, cheesy series about some kids. One of them has technology powers that are ill-defined, and he has a vague faith involving a giant robot, and his teachers are evil and sending giant monsters to fight him. But it's a lot of fun. It's got good monster designs, and I'm really happy that something like this is actually coming out in the States. We've had some other examples of giant robot type of stuff coming out from the Americas. One of my absolute favorites is Robot Jocks.
Crash and burn, dude.
Yes. Yeah, this is about a in the far future, wars are decided by tournaments between two robot pilots, and it's by director Stuart Gordon, who's best known for Reanimator, and it's just a hoot. It's like, I think until Pacific Rim came out, this might have been the greatest giant robot rendering in live action. I could also make a case for Gunhead, but then people would throw things at me, so I try not to. Yeah, Robot Jux was super popular to the point where the studio that made it was Empire, but they were sort of reborn as Full Moon, and Full Moon was all about exploiting that, so they had all these sequels that weren't really sequels come out. On the particularly kaiju-ish side, we have the movie Planet Patrol, which recycles footage from Craw the Sea Monster, as well as a handful of others, including Robot Wars there. But direct-to-video sort of garbagey filmmaking is a lot of fun, because you get really unrestrained ideas sometimes there, and I think a lot of people that are fans of you know, the sort of Japanese stuff that we like are given a little bit more carte blanche to shoot for the stars, even if they don't always achieve what they set out to do. So one of my favorite examples that it's on Amazon Prime, but only has a DVD release in Japan, and I think that speaks a little bit to its Japanese nature, is Creepies 2. So this is a sequel to the movie Creepies, and it's so Creepies is a mess of a movie that's basically Return of the Living Dead with spiders, but Creepies 2 is set in the future after a giant spider has invaded Los Angeles, and naturally the government does the logical way to combat spiders is build a giant robot that will fight the spiders. This has some of the worst special effects I've ever seen, but it also has a lot of heart, and it's fun just to watch, you know, a spider on a satellite dish uses a satellite dish to like reflect a laser back at the robot that fired it, and things like that. Also on the direct-to-video front, we've got some mockbusters, especially when both of the Pacific Rim movies came out. We got the Atlantic Rim movies, and I think this is a little funny because the first Atlantic Rim was released in Japan as this Battle of Atlantis, and then the second one was released as Atlantic Rim. So it's sort of like one of those like what number Final Fantasy game corresponds to which one. You need to like break out a chart. So this is from the infamous studio, The Asylum. You know, they're the people that will make, you know, Snakes on a Train or Transmorphers, and sort of, you know, if you're not paying attention when you're checking out at Walmart, you might accidentally buy the wrong movie, sort of thing. But they have some other stuff. And one of my favorites that they have done is the Mega Shark series, which started with Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, which I think played across the hall at some point during the convention this year. But what I love is that as things go along in that franchise, they get progressively more and more Japanese, to the point where they have like fire the oxygen destroyer missiles and things like that. So the third example, the third movie in this franchise is Mega Shark versus Mecha Shark, which is a great pun, and also that plays on the tropes that we love from, you know, Mechanicong and Mechagodzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah, etc., etc. And then the next movie in the franchise also has a giant robot that fights the shark, and this one is called Mega Shark versus Colossus, but the Japanese title is Mega Shark versus Great Titan. So if you've seen the Attack on Titan series or even any art from it, what's going on with this guy, you can sort of feel a little bit of the mockbuster stuff creeping in here as well. But anyway, that's a bit of a rundown. The list of potentially discussable titles goes on and on, but we can open the floor for discussion. Yo.
All the Metal Hero series, but specifically G-SAVIOUR, is very popular in Brazil actually, and it's getting a movie, I think, by Brazil.
Oh yeah, I did hear something about that.
Brazil loves the shit out of G-SAVIOUR.
Yeah, and they have there's a mecha in it that transform, but also like involves like a lot of kaiju and stuff.
Yeah. It's that one is very kaiju heavy. But yeah, Brazil is this stuff is very popular in Brazil. Actually, when I had a Brazilian neighbor, I was wearing an Ultraman shirt one day, and she looked at it and was like, "Is that from Winspector?" And I was like, "You know Winspector, but you don't know Ultraman." Okay. Other. Yo.
Would you consider Evangelion to be a kaiju or a giant robot series?
I think of it as a kaiju series. I mean, it's especially the Angels or Apostles are very kaiju-ish, and Evangelion has a whole lot of Ultraman in it. Like you learn more about the subtext of Evangelion from watching Ultraman than you do from reading the Bible. So let's put it that way. But yeah, and then the Evas themselves are monstrous, and you know, you can make an argument either way because there's also Mazinger and Ideon and other influences that go into that. Yep.
Do you post a list of the movies you discuss in your panels?
Yes, so I am recording this, and I'll try to have it up on YouTube at some point.
Okay, awesome, great.
Yeah. So the blog that I write for is Mazer Patrol, so I have been negligent on posting there recently, but should be back into that pretty soon from,
Awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
I apologize, I was a minute or two late, so maybe you covered this. You clearly know a lot about the genre of movies. What draws you to this genre, or what do you love about it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not.
I mean, sometimes you just like something and you don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I like sort of big ideas. So things that are out there and wouldn't necessarily be done. Even though a lot of them you can look at it and be like, okay, well this series is taking this influence and throwing them into a blender and then coming up with something a little bit novel. You know, it's it's sort of like, why do any of us like kaiju, right? So, yep.
Two questions. One, what's the robot in the bottom right corner of that slide?
This one here?
Yeah.
That was from an Italian movie, I believe.
Hercules, I think?
Yeah, it was from Hercules, yeah.
And the other one is, it's not really like a regular TV show, it's not a movie. Have you heard of Massive Monster Mayhem?
I'm not sure.
It's like a Family Channel produced kaiju themed kids game show.
Huh.
It came out last year. I don't know, I know a little bit about it just because I saw some ads for it. I couldn't really believe my eyes, but it's like guys in suits, and you have to challenge kind of intergalactic robot warriors and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
I keep forgetting to watch that channel, but I keep hearing about fun things that come out there. It's like,
weirdest stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
This is kind of a stretch, considering it's technically not on the same level as the films here, but would you consider RoboCop to be sort of a robot movie? Or at least along the lines of a giant robot, because of Ed 209 and such?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's one that you could argue strongly for the case of Japanese influence on RoboCop because of, 8-Man and Gavan, and yeah, so... Yeah, so you could make a case for that. Hey.
I have two questions. First of all, what's the building one? What's that from?
So that is from a movie called Robo Geisha, and I would say you should wait until you're older to watch it.
And then also Voltron. Wouldn't Voltron be in this area?
Yeah, if they made a live action Voltron, I would totally have it. I just sort of was like, okay, there's so many anime robots that is, let's not talk about anime.
I already made a live action Voltron film. It's called Power Rangers. No, I'm just kidding.
That's arguable, yeah.
Did you see the Okan Bat presentation?
Oh yeah.
So he was talking about in the anime or in the manga version of that, it was the manga version of the live action TV show or the live action movie, had a giant robot dragon.
Yeah, I want to look into that because
that seems really early.
Yeah, because it was like 1950 or something. Like yeah.
I was like, that seems really early for that.
I haven't had a chance. Like that panel was really great, and I just made a bunch of notes and I've been to like just comb through that. But yeah, there have been like examples of things that came before Tetsujin that sometimes get brought up. People are like, oh, there's this big robot in Astro Boy or whatever, but then like, just in terms of like the footprint that it cast on Japanese pop culture, that's the big thing there. Yep.
Speaking of which, why didn't you mention the best robot movie, the Astro Boy film with Nick Cage in it?
Well, that's animated.
That was a joke, though.
Oh, okay.
It kinda counts.
That studio almost did a Tetsujin movie that looked really great, though.
Yeah, it did, but I got shut down. So.
Gotcha, man, too.
Yeah. Yep.
Would the kaiju and Xavier hybrids be counted more towards kaiju or androids?
I would say both. So I don't know if you came in towards the end, but yeah, we have examples of like Mechagodzilla, which is a kaiju and a robot. So it can definitely, you can have something that is both of those things. Yep.
Who's the guy in the top row right below Danger 5?
Oh, this is Taikon V, which is a Korean, not quite Mazinger, really. We filed off the serial numbers.
He's a bootleg, basically.
Yeah. Korea is sort of South Korea is sort of amazing for like you watch things and like, oh, this isn't Batman, he's a different color, or you know, these aren't the Ninja Turtles because we say they're not, and the copyright violations were pretty in vogue.
Sorry, what was that name again?
Taikon V.
Taikon or Taikon?
Like Taekwondo, like Taekwondo. Yep.
Just on that note, that actually reminded me, is this from like a TV series or something? Because I know that recently I was at GDC this year for work, and there was a Taekwondo V booth because there was like a newly licensed VR experience starring him, like licensed properly, even though I guess he was kind of a knockoff.
Yeah, this was from a proof of concept thing, but yeah, they keep, because it was a big deal in South Korea, they keep wanting to do more with that property, but also like it's super sketchy.
Speaking of,
I'd like to get your opinion on what did you think of Pacific Rim Uprising?
I think I gave it a 3 out of 5, as opposed to the 5 out of 5 that the first one was.
It would be really great if you were on a podcast and reviewed Pacific Rim Uprising.
I was about to mention that, yeah. So yeah, I came on the Kaiju Transmissions episode and talked with them about Pacific Rim Uprising, and I also briefly mentioned Pacific Rim Uprising in a book that I just wrote. So I got a couple of copies of that if you want to rifle through it.
What's the book called? Tell us more about it.
Where can I get it?
So,
The Book of Taekwondo 5.
yeah, so I wrote a book called Kaiju for Hipsters, 101 Alternative Kaiju Movies, or 101 Alternative Giant Monster Movies. It's on Amazon, and I also have some copies at the convention. It's, you know, $20, so come talk to me. And yeah, I'd be happy, you know, feel free to, if you want to sit here and like read the entire thing in front of me, I'm also cool with that.
Oh.
Yeah, but it is 418 pages, so it could take a while.
I was wondering, did you manage to see that Chinese Ultraman movie?
Yeah, Dragon Force. Yeah, that's something.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it ever actually was released.
Yeah, it was released and promptly bootlegged, so it's one of those ones where like you can watch it on YouTube and be like, oh, I know I'm violating copyright law, but so are the people that made this movie. So. Yeah, that's one that, because it's a sequel to like a TV spin-off thing, it's also hard to get context, and also in Chinese, but yeah, Ultraman is like a villain in it. It's strange. All right, well, we're at time, but I don't think there's anything in here afterwards, so if anyone wants to hang out and talk, I'll be around.
Thank you.